All right, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever it is that you're going to wind up watching this. If you watch it, I hope that you do. As a church, we've been reading through this gospel reading plan since January 1st. We started with the Gospel of John, then went to Mark, then we went to Luke, and then Matthew, reading one chapter a day. And what I would love to do is to just hear from you as a church or anybody that participated in this, is what's something that you learned while reading for the first time or rereading through the Gospels? What's a new insight? Maybe something that God reminded you of, maybe something that you've never thought of before. Maybe it's just something that stood out to you. I don't know what it would be, but let's hear from you. Put it in the comments. I'm going to post this on Facebook and let us know how God spoke to you through this gospel reading plan the last 3 months. And I'll share with you something that really stood out to me. Back in late January, we were reading through the Gospel of Mark, and we got to Mark chapter 5. And this is one of my favorite chapters. I've preached on it many times. I've read through it many times. And it starts with the story of Jesus going across the lake, and he meets this guy named Legion, or he identifies as Legion. A guy that's possessed by many demons, who's freakishly strong, who's cutting himself, he's hurting himself, and nobody wants to be around him, and yet Jesus travels to go see him. And then Jesus heals him. He casts out the demons. And if you know the story, the demons wind up going into the pigs, and the pigs wind up in the water. Well, obviously, those who tend to the pigs were pretty upset about this. So we're told in verse 14, those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. Now, that's the verse that kind of stood out to me. I was actually listening to it on the Bible app when we were reading through this part of Mark. And in my imagination, I pictured all these men who were tending to the pigs running or walking into the near town, the nearest village, to tell everybody, getting them all riled up, and then coming back out to the countryside. And then I thought, well, they didn't have cars, they didn't have social media, they didn't have texting, so that might have taken them a few hours. And in the meantime, while they're getting this group riled up to come ask Jesus to leave their region, what's Jesus doing? We're told that they come back. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there dressed and in his right mind. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. So they asked him to leave. But my thought is, if it took them a few hours to get this crowd out there to ask Jesus to leave, that means that Jesus probably would have sat with this man that he had just healed or cast these demons out of. He probably would have sat with him for a few hours. And I thought that was really neat. This man's being restored to life, restored to his family, restored to his community, and restored to God. And Jesus didn't just heal him and then take off. Jesus sat there with him at least for a few hours. And so I had this picture in my mind of Jesus sitting with us as he heals us, as we're restored to life, restored to God, and reconciled to others. This image of us sitting with Jesus and Jesus sitting with us. I wonder what they would have talked about that day and what that would have meant to that man to just be able to sit there with Jesus for a little while. And I compare that to this church camp that I was working at about a decade ago. I was a youth minister and I was serving as one of the directors. And one afternoon, a storm came through and it was raining really hard. So most of us went into this pavilion to take cover, but there was this one kid, kind of a loner, spent a lot of time by himself. We noticed that he was just sitting out in the field getting rained on. And we were thinking, what's he doing? And then we see this lady, an older lady who was serving as a staff member that week. She went out to where he was sitting and she just sat down on the ground with him and sat there with him and talked with him. And she got soaking wet, he got soaking wet, but she made sure that he wasn't alone. And other people were laughing at him. But there's something about that day and that image that happened a decade ago that is burned into my brain. And as I was reading Mark 5, picturing Jesus sitting with this man formerly known as Legion, and I thought about that lady sitting with the kid at camp, and I think about Jesus just sitting with us even in our loneliness, even in our fear, and even in our frustration. So that was something kind of new to me that I'd never thought of before as we were reading through the Gospels. What's something new insight, something that you thought was neat from this gospel reading plan? Share it with us, and let's encourage each other with that. And I'll say a word about where I'm sitting right now. This is back behind the stage in our auditorium at Pine Tree. This is the baptistry area. So this may look familiar to some of you. Maybe some of you have never been back here. But I'll remind you that at the end of 2019, we had a big prayer night here at church. I think it was November 20th, the night that we did it. And we split groups up all over our facility, our auditorium, the children's wing, the hub where the youth group meets, the parking lot, in the auditorium, in the nursery. And we had a group come over here by the baptistry and just prayed for the lives of whoever it may be that will walk these steps into those waters behind me to be baptized into Christ. And I want you to know that just this week, several people have put on Christ in baptism, so these prayers are already being answered, and God is still working, even though we're not able to be around each other. You know, people are still coming to Christ, people are still being baptized into Christ, and I thought that was pretty awesome that God's already answering that prayers, and I just wanted you to get this visual of, I know you can't see the waters, but the water is up there at the top of the steps behind me. Okay, share with me what you learned from the gospel reading plan. I've had several people ask me what the next reading plan will be. Our planning is a little off right now because of all this, but I am going to preach at least one sermon on the book of Genesis starting Sunday. If you want to read something, read Genesis, and maybe we'll stay there for a few weeks, and then hopefully we'll come up with a new reading plan for you soon. Love to hear from you. Y'all have a great week. God bless.